Yeah, we said some people just kind of.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of people that had to quarantine in there.
Yeah.
Like, when I look at those lab grades, it's like, here's the people. And then here's the people that have had to quarantine, and it's
Yeah,
really
trying to catch
dramatic.
Trying to catch up in these type of classes was terrible.
I know it's hard.
For like this, I spent like, not like an hour or two every day after.
It's
Once I got
hard.
out, just trying to catch up.
Okay, so I am recording this for Sam to use later. And I'm going to start back in where I left off before with progress of infections.
His video was really cool.
Yeah, that was,
These,
yeah, I mean.
The TED Talk.
the
Yeah.
TED Talk, yeah, those are all those TED Talks are so good. And I love that guy's accent. So, it's been a long time since I've been around somebody with the Dutch accent, but it's charming. Okay, so our next big topic is talking about how do we describe infections? How do we describe infections, and what are the stages that they go through? And there in this segment, there are two lists of 5. This is a list of 5, and this is 5 stages. Yeah, it's not going to work. 5 stages in the development of an infection. So this is referring to what does the pathogen, the virus, the bacterium, the fungus, whatever the pathogen is, what does the pathogen go through in an infection cycle? And there are five stages of this from the pathogen point of view. And those are listed here in a like horizontal way. So it has to go to the correct portal of entry. It has to attach to the host and stay there and not get washed away. It has to survive the host defenses. And then if it's an infection that we care about, it has to cause some kind of damage. And then if the infection is going to pass to another person, the pathogen has to leave the host. Those are the things that has to happen from a pathogen standpoint and to cause an infection. Ah, there we go. I don't know, I feel struggling today in a variety of ways. This one, causing damage, this is where flora.
That is nice. What you do? That's nice. I'm
I
sorry.
have no idea. I put it on calligraphy or something because it's just struggling. But it does make my writing look cool.
Yeah.
This one, flora don't do damage. Our microbial flora or our microbiota, they would go through all of these other things, but they don't do damage to us. And that's really,
But like, what if they like found like a different entry where they're not supposed to be, then they would go through those steps?
yes, so that's a good point. If we're talking about, let's say skin flora, and they go through the skin, get on the skin, and they attach to us in various ways, and they avoid our defenses, they don't do damage, and then they move on to our child, something like that, or your grandma who lives with you. But then if they happen to get into the wrong portal, and like it got in your respiratory tract or in your blood or something, then it could cause damage. So kind of going into the wrong portal could put these into damage mode. But the main difference in what happens in these stages, whether something's dangerous or not, if it doesn't do damage, we don't really mind.
Yeah.
They live with us. But if it does do damage, then it becomes something that we need to treat, so to speak.
Do we need to know all those like portals of entry and exit, portals of exits?
So each one of these, I'm going to have on a separate slide to kind of describe it. So you do need to know generally what are the basic portals of entry, which is here. I don't know what I did to this thing. I can't.
I don't think you put the pen back and then you turned it off.
I don't know. But I don't have to write that much about this particular
Don't
one.
you have to turn on the smart ink to like start
I
it?
feel like it's on.
No, because remember you turned it off?
I turned it off, turned it on.
There you go.
I want to do the pen.
Yeah. And I
It's
think,
like I can either write on the board or I can advance the slide. Now that has come off. So here, the portals of entry are what are the major ways that pathogens can come into the body. And this picture is actually showing portals of exit. But I'm going to use the same picture to talk about what are the portals of entry. So portals of entry are skin. So some bacteria can, or some pathogens, literally can infect through the skin. And especially if the skin is broken skin. Skin can be a portal of entry.
bless you.
Mucous membranes definitely are. So that could be nose, mouth, the surface of your eye, urogenital membranes. Just going to put urogenital there. That can be a portal of entry. Blood via insects or needles. Insects, needles, or wounds. Those are another portal of entry. But each individual pathogen has specific portals of entry. They don't all use all portals.
What do you mean by insects, needles, and wounds? Is that associated with blood?
Ways that things could get into your blood. Yeah. So normally we should not have blood very accessible to pathogens unless you're wounded and bleeding. Or if an insect bites you, that can put pathogen into your blood. And needles can if they are not clean. So like by needles, I'm basically meaning drug needles. Like people who use illicit drugs, not sterile medical needles. That hardly ever happens anymore.
So flora is only harmful when it's in the wrong spot.
Generally, yeah.
And is that from person to person as well? Like if another person's skin flora is on my skin flora, that's not bad.
It kind of depends on the person's immune and health status. So like our skin flora could be dangerous to a cancer patient just because they have low immunity.
But not just like regular day-to-day.
Not really. Yeah. Unless it's, there's certain rashes that can transmit person to person, but they're not really skin flora. They're more of a pathogen. Like my two younger boys have molluscum, which makes these little bumps on their skin, and it's a virus. And like one of them's totally freaked out by it, picking at it all at a time, and the other one's like, all right. But they went and asked their doctor, and they said, well, you can leave it alone and it'll eventually go away, or you can like pop that and pick out the little core, but it's not really going to do anything to you. But they transmit it to each other because they're basically like twins. And the first one that was bothered, he's over it now, and the second one, who's not bothered, he's almost over it because he's got they're about ready to pop. It'll be gone by Christmas.
What is it?
It's called molluscum. It's a viral infection that's skin virus. It's not a big deal, but it looks weird and bothers some kids. So again, certain microbes use certain portals, and it's not really the point of this class that you know all the different pathogens and what their portals are. Some of that stuff I'm going over in the lab when we talk about the different bacteria and what they do to you and so on. So I'm not going to really say very much about this, except that individual pathogens can use individual portals.
But then they could potentially use all of them, right?
I don't think there's any pathogen that uses all portals, because it kind of depends on these other things as well as to like what is the correct portal. So, okay, so assuming that there is a pathogen and it is going through the correct portal, it's important that that pathogen not get washed away from the host. For instance, if I breathed in coronavirus right now and it went up through my nose or my mouth, and then it went down into my lungs, and it floated in the mucus there. So it's gone in the correct portal, but it is not really attached to me until it moves through the mucus and binds onto my cells with the receptor. Otherwise, it could get washed away when I sneeze out the mucus. So it's like, it did go in my body, but it never permanently attached to me. So just
not
Just
quite a carrier,
what'd you say?
not quite a carrier.
Yeah, you wouldn't be a carrier in that sense. It just kind of was in and then it was back out. Yeah. So attaching, they could use spikes. They could use capsules, fimbriae, or some other surface proteins for that attachment. But just touching the person or technically going in the right portal is not enough. Attach before the body flushes them out. And when we get to immune system, we have a lot of ways to flush out pathogens and try to not let them attach. So then once they attach, they in some way are going to have to escape our innate and acquired, see in there, acquired immune responses.
Would you say that capsules are like the most effective at that?
Capsules are one way. So if like capsules are really good because they could let you both attach and hide at the same time. Coronavirus has some specific enzymes that let it hide from us in a molecular way. So it has an enzyme that causes its genome to look like a human messenger RNA. It's like putting on a fake human uniform. Like, nothing to see here. I'm not a danger. And the really good pathogens have specific ways that they get around the immune system. It's not just that we don't notice that they're there. They're literally doing something to hide or
Can you put
destroy.
like acquired immune response? Like why'd you put acquired?
What did you
Just want to
say?
just be like immune responses.
Because I want to, these are words that you need to know later.
Okay.
So it's just to get it on your radar. This is like the first immune responses and then the later ones. If you're going to be real successful pathogen, you have to outfox both of them.
So the innate would be like the basic, like white T cells going over there.
T cells are acquired,
Acquired.
but innate is like your flushing out mechanisms and your barriers, and getting a fever is considered innate. So it's kind of the first set of defenses. So if if you've gone in the correct portal and you've attached and you've evaded the immune system, when we really care about infections is when people have health problems. Like all the people walking around with coronavirus infections that are not harming them, it's not harming them. So, I mean, it's kind of a problem that they could pass it to somebody else, but when we care the most is when there's harm. So usually harm is done by parts of a pathogen that we call virulence factors. And virulence factors, you can think of those as like weapon molecules.
Which you mentioned earlier, can be sent to the villi, right?
Pili would be a virulence factor, and capsule is a virulence factor. Things like, I'll put that on the next slide, but certain enzymes that are dangerous, those would be virulence factors. Or, I'm going to write this higher up, it's too low. Or, we can also think of virulence factor almost as like the ability to cause an overwhelming immune response. That on its own can be a danger. And it seems like for when coronavirus patients, they first get sick and they feel sick and then they start to get better because their immune system is fighting it. And then they can have this really sudden crash of symptoms, and it's their immune system causing collateral damage as it's fighting the disease. So Chaplain Alderman, that happened to his dad. His dad has coronavirus, and he had it like for a week, and he was doing okay, and then suddenly he was not okay. So there's something about coronavirus that causes some people's immune system to be like so overwhelmingly fighting it that the immune response is damaging them. And we'll come back and talk about that later in the semester, but that can be a danger. Any kinds of weapon molecules. And the next slide is about enzymes. So I want to talk about some specific enzymes that can be weapon molecules. And there I put the immune response thing on this slide, I forgot. Okay, so we have seen some enzymes that are weapons already in lab. So like coagulase that clots blood, that would be an exoenzyme. I couldn't remember the word I was looking for. Hemolysins that digest blood. So yesterday when we were looking at hemolysis activity, those bacteria that do blood breakdown, they are putting enzymes outside of them, and the enzymes are going and digesting the blood. And that would be a danger to us if it was in the body. Those are called hemolysins. There are other enzymes that destroy collagen or destroy other body tissues that would be considered exoenzymes. There are some microbes that can also make toxins. And toxins are not enzymes, but they are chemicals that damage body function. So not enzymes, but chemicals that damage some part of our body function, like tetanus toxin. Yeah, tetanus toxin is a chemical made by a bacterium that interferes with your nervous system function. And it actually causes nerves to activate and not be able to stop activating. So it causes muscle contraction and you get locked into place. So the old term for tetanus is lockjaw. It's like people would clench their muscles clench because the toxin is making it do that, and they can't unclench, or like all over their body, they contracted muscles all over. That's a toxin. There's a particular toxin that I'm going to talk about all on its own called endotoxin, which is a gram-negative particular toxin, and I have a separate slide about that, because that one is different and really important in human infections. Maybe.
So what's the difference between exotoxins and endotoxins?
Exo are released outside of the cell on purpose. Let me erase that, and maybe I'll write this on the sideboard. Exo versus
And same thing with
endotoxin.
so then the same thing for the exoenzymes. They're sent outside of the cell to
Yeah.
cause damage.
Or exoenzymes. Those are sent outside the pathogen cell. To the host area. So it's like a bullet weapon. Like, I'm going to send this to you, it's exo. It's coming out of the pathogen and it's going to the host area. Endotoxin is something very specific that's a piece of gram-negative outer membrane. It's a particular piece of the gram-negative outer membrane. And so if you remember, gram-negatives have plasma membrane, and then they have thin peptidoglycan, and then they have outer membrane, and in the outer membrane, they had these sugars chains called lipopolysaccharide, or LPS. That's a piece of gram-negative outer membrane. But if LPS breaks off and floats around, we don't call it LPS anymore. We call it endotoxin.
So when
It's
it's floating
floating
around
around.
the membrane, it's called endotoxin.
Yeah. Yeah. When it's on the membrane, that's okay. If it breaks off the membrane, it's called endotoxin. And this is dangerous because our immune system, I'm going to write the word overreacts. Maybe it's not an overreaction, but it ends up hurting us. So floating endotoxin is a signal to our immune system that we are completely besieged by gram-negative bacteria and we've got to fight it with everything that we've got. And we do. But fighting it with everything we've got, can end up killing us. So this guy here that they're showing in the bed, his problem is the pink broken off pieces of a gram-negative outer membrane. So this is trying to show that his problem is he's got endotoxin broken off and floating around in his body, and his immune system is going to fight that to such an extent that it actually endangers your life.
Isn't endotoxin specifically the lipopolysaccharide, or can it be any?
It is just
molecule?
that.
Just that?
It is just that specific thing. And the name endotoxin came before people knew that it was actually LPS.
So how does it break off? Is that something that the bacteria will automatically do?
No, so
Or is it like if
Let's
like the
try to
cell
see if
wall
I
gets
can-
damaged in somewhere?
So the only time that endotoxin breaks off is if something is killing the cells,
Okay.
which could be a really effective drug against gram-negatives that you give in a high dose and it's like, it's working great. But if it makes enough endotoxin come off and that gets into the blood, then it's a danger to the person. So when people have really bad gram-negative infections, you kind of have to fight it very carefully with drugs because you don't want to destroy all at once and make the bacteria come apart and then cause the person to have endotoxic shock. Write this down. The overreaction, that process is called endotoxic shock. And it comes along with a great decrease in blood pressure, like life-threateningly so. This down BP, this is dangerously low blood pressure. And that can happen when either drugs or the immune system is fighting a serious gram-negative infection all over the body. And endotoxic shock is the worst when LPS gets in the bloodstream. And then you have a bloodstream battle and blood pressure goes way down and it's really dangerous for the person.
You said it happened when the body's fighting on what?
Gram-negative, a really serious gram-negative infection. Because gram-positives don't have this. They can fall apart all day long and no LPS will come off. There's no endotoxin. Back in the 70s, you could buy Tampax that lasted like 2 days. But they stopped selling those because it was making some number of women have gram-negative infections that got in their blood, and some number of women died from endotoxic shock. And that's called toxic shock syndrome. And when that was discovered, it's like, whoa, we ought to not sell these super mega tampons anymore. And so they stopped and made laws about that, because that was a huge, I think it was like 400 women or something like that got endotoxic shock out of however many million tampons. But that was a big public health endotoxic shock catastrophe back then that resulted in changing laws. So endotoxin is just LPS, it's just that one thing. All of the different exotoxins are more than one thing. And this is not a chart to memorize, but it's just like, how do you recognize endotoxic shock? It comes with fever, it comes with all over body inflammation. It has to be from a gram-negative, and they have to be dying to release this endotoxin. And move on from that. This picture, I was going to skip over it, but it's a nice depiction of the different kinds of hemolysis. So we might as well label beta. This would be gamma, and this is alpha hemolysis. And these two are coming from different exoenzymes that the bacteria are sending into the media, and they're doing their thing on the blood cells. Those would be examples of exotoxins. Alpha, beta, gamma. Hemolysis. Oh, and then we need to talk again about portal of exit. So I'm going to go back to the this picture, which is really about portals of exit, this is talking about how can microbes leave the body. Portals of exit. The portal of entry is not always the same as the portal of exit. Sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. But for respiratory diseases, the portal of exit is a lot of times cough, sneeze, or now breathe. But the new book will say breathing, now that everyone thinks about breathing as a way to transmit disease. Skin, especially open, that can be a portal of exit. Urine, although not as much as you would think from the way people act. Urine is not as disease-ridden as any other body fluid, I swear. So you should go ahead and sit down on the toilet. I'm just saying. There are diseases that transmit through urine, but it's not that many.
You said skin?
Yeah, skin, certain ones can transmit through skin. Certain ones can transmit through blood, either by the insect taking it away from you or syringe taking it away from you. And many diseases also transmit through feces. Feces is a portal of exit and hardly ever a portal of entry. We'll come back to that later.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that like later today or Friday. But and then the other one would be semen and vaginal fluids, which they don't have up here, but that's a pretty big category of portal of exit. Some diseases transmit through saliva, like mono is that way. But these are the major portals of exit. And then whatever is coming out the portal of exit, if it's going to transmit to a new person, it has to go into the portal of entry in the new person. Some way or another. Coronavirus, the portal of entry and the portal of exit are usually respiratory. There's some concern that you could catch coronavirus from, if someone has diarrhea with it and it's got virus in the diarrhea and it gets up into the air and then you breathe it in. Not for sure, but maybe. Maybe. It's gross, isn't it? This is definitely much more likely from what we're seeing with cases and how people got coronavirus. So we have those 5 stages from the pathogen standpoint. Portal of entry, attach to the host, evade the immune system, cause some damage, and then leave through the exit. Those are pathogen-based. The next thing that we're going to talk about in regards to stages of infection have to do with what it feels like to the person having the infection. And there are 4 of these stages. But this set of stages is based on what does the person feel. Or we could think of it as stages in the symptoms of an infected person. Or stages of an infection. And I will try to be like super clear about this when I'm talking about it on the exam or
in class, which set I'm talking about.
So this one is going to be in the form of a graph, and you will need to draw this kind of graph on your exam. So that's the A part of a question. Draw this and label the stages, and then answer questions about it. And on this graph, we're the person's symptoms. How does the person feel? The intensity of their symptoms over time. And it starts when we have exposure to the microbe at the correct portal of entry. So we're assuming that they were exposed to the microbe through the correct portal of entry, and that then the microbe managed to attach and evade immune system and go on and cause damage. This is assuming damage is going to happen. So the stages are called incubation period. The next one is prodromal stage. The next stage is called period. This is the stage. Height of infection is just when you feel the worst. It's not the stage name. It's called period of invasion.
Would we need to mark the height of infection, or is that kind of obvious?
I don't mind if you do, but
It wouldn't count against us if we didn't.
no. But if you call the whole stage height of infection, it's just, that's not what it's called. It's called period of invasion. And then we have convalescent period. Every infection that a person goes through that causes them to feel anything goes through these stages. But the length of the stage and the intensity of how bad you feel is different for different diseases. So I want to write some of that to emphasize it.
How come stage 2 is called the period of invasion if it's like already been incubated into the host?
Again, they
one
were
of the most
named
viral-
before it was really understood what actually was happening.
Okay.
That
So,
makes
but like
sense.
that's just when the strongest immune response would be happening, then, right?
Not necessarily. We'll talk about that in a minute. So all infections that do damage go through the stages, but the length of the stages and the intensity of symptoms vary for each pathogen. They vary for each pathogen, and they may even vary between people infected with the same pathogen. So we start with, when did you get exposed? First time you had any exposure to that microbe, and it was at the correct portal of entry. And most of the time, there will be some time that passes before you ever feel anything. So the time between when you were exposed to it and when you start to feel anything, that's called incubation period. How long is the incubation period of SARS-CoV-2? 2 days? 2 to 5 days? What'd you say? Too far?
2 to 5.
2 to 5. It is too far. It can be pretty long.
Well, I mean.
It's like actually even
it's
longer
like
than
14
that.
days that you can.
Most people will feel symptoms between days 2 to 5, but some people don't for 14, which is why you have that incredibly long quarantine period. So annoying. And that's different for different diseases. Most diseases don't have such a long incubation period.
So I walked in the morning when I was little,
Mm-hmm.
and like every time I went to the nurse, I had like a temperature. But every time they got me to my regular doctor, like I wouldn't have a temperature, and I went through like stages and I was like this.
Mm-hmm.
Why doesn't it like just like height and then?
Yeah, so yours would have been kind of like this. And it has to do with, it's taking your immune system a long time to get rid of it. Or if you were on medicine for it, and you took the medicine and it kind of went back down. But then if you, I don't know if you stop taking your medicine, but a lot of times kids are not excited about taking their medicine. And then it starts to come back. Strep throat infections do this a lot because they get like deep in your throat and they're a little bit far from the blood supply. And you can take medicine for it and it will kill most of it, but then it will come back. So having those cycles are more likely with some kinds of infections than others. But like stomach virus, norovirus, it's like, oh my gosh, and then you get better. Like it hits you all at once and you're just drastically vomiting and then you get better in 2 days and then it's over. Mono, it's like, it's like, I feel sick still. I still feel sick. Still feel sick, kind of getting better. So it's different for different diseases, but all 4 stages exist for every infectious disease. So incubation period, you don't feel anything. You don't feel anything yet. As soon as you start to feel something, that's prodromal. Prodromal is when we start to feel something. And people will tend to describe this as like, I feel like I'm coming down with something. I feel a little off. I feel under the weather, but they're not really sick yet. So it kind of starts with slight symptoms. And ideally, this is actually the best time to seek treatment. Is like before it gets really bad. Ideally, you would seek treatment and you would go see a doctor or nurse practitioner when you're in prodromal, but most people do not do that. And the people that do that, we say that they're hypochondriacs. Kind of make fun of them. That's really the best, but most people do not do that for a variety of reasons. Like, well, I might feel better tomorrow. That's what I do. We'll see how I feel tomorrow. It may go away, or it might get worse. That's prodromal. As soon as symptoms really accelerate, and you start feeling a lot worse, that's period of invasion. The idea of you start to feel a little bit bad, and then you start to feel really bad, and then you start to feel better. People have known that for a long time. And it was assumed that when you really start to feel bad is when the microbe is actually invading your body, but that actually happened back here. So I think it's old terminology that just stuck around.
Okay.
If it were me, I'd call it symptom acceleration stage.
Yeah.
That's what makes
But
sense.
that's
But
like, that's when like, that would be like the virus has, or the bacteria has like replicated a lot, and that's when like the height of infection would be then.
it just depends on how it acts. There's some microbes that can multiply and they count how many of each other there are. And when they sense that there's enough, then they release the toxin. And that's not common, but for those, you could have a lot of microbes back here. But then when you start to feel bad is when they decide to release the toxin. So it's not always that this goes with the growth curve. It usually does, but not always. So this is when people actually usually seek medical treatment. Most people seek treatment in this stage. Oops. This stage, when you're really feeling bad.
Use that word.
Yeah. Yeah, so this kind of stuff, when I ask you details about the graph that you draw, it's this kind of stuff. Yeah.
So the
Prodromal.
oh, I see.
Prodromal. And I think later in nursing school, you learn this word called prodrome, which is like the earliest sign of a certain disease. Prodrome. Or like some people, when they're going to get a migraine, they see lights before. Or like an aura, that's the prodrome for a migraine. It's what comes before. As soon as you start to feel some better, that's convalescent period. Or as soon as the symptoms begin to subside, you start feeling better, that's convalescent period. And convalescent generally means getting well. Convalescent period. A lot of times the patient may not actually notice that they're starting to feel better. Like if you've ever felt pretty sick and then you get busy and then the next day you're like, oh, I don't feel as sick. I think I'm getting better. You usually don't notice the moment that it starts. But if you were tracking the moment that it starts, as soon as you start to feel less awful, that's the beginning of convalescent period.
So the
yeah.
beginning of the number one is like, you're infected, but like nothing is happening.
Mm-hmm. And this is hard to figure out sometimes. Like, how do people know when they were exposed? A lot of times you don't know. But you can know when prodromal starts, because that's when you ask a patient for their chart, when did you start to feel bad? And you would say, like I had to say this for Joseph, well, last Thursday he had a dry spot in his throat, is how he described it. He had a dry spot. And so that would be a start of prodromal for him. And then when we go to the doctors, when he has a cough, like that was his symptoms getting worse, but he had the dry spot 5 days ago and kept asking his teacher, can I have a drink? I need to get a drink. And then she finally gave him candy so he would stop going to get a drink. Because it was disrupting the class, I think. Yeah. One other thing to note about this concept and about this graph.
I don't think people got enough room to.
Yeah, I'm already.
Well, you could write it like on the back or in that blank spot. You got a blank spot in the slide before I see it from here. People could be infectious at any stage depending on what pathogen they've got. So there, you can't really look and say that this is when people are infectious. I mean, probably they're infectious there. But that's one thing that coronavirus has like completely turned on its head, is that it's not that often that people are infectious in the incubation period, but this disease they are. And like the question this week is President Trump going to go debate next week when he's technically still in convalescent period? And I'm like, how are they going to work that out? Like this is all so fascinating to me. Every little thing in the news, like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Because he's probably going to still be in convalescent stage, I would think, next week. certain diseases, you could be infectious at any of those stages. I think we will start with this slide next time. This is too many definitions, but I want to give you two definitions to close with today, which are symptoms and signs of disease. These mean two separate things. So symptoms of disease versus signs of disease. And I think I may have meant to put this back in the definitions page long time ago. If somebody has signs of disease, that's something that an outside observer can see or measure objectively. Signs. So signs would be something like you have a fever of 102, or you look really pale, or the patient was sweating during the whole exam, or they have high blood pressure, or their A1C was 500. It's probably unrealistic. Something that you could measure, and you know that they're not lying. Like, they could not be faking that. Symptoms are self-reported. They are subjective. And things that can't be reliably measured. So, for example, if I told you this morning, I feel so nauseous, or nauseated, or whatever is the correct terminology, I could be lying about that. Or if I say, oh, it hurts so bad. Maybe, like,
You try to get out of school.
You say,
Like,
my
well,
kids
I
aren't
don't
that
feel too
kind.
good.
They don't do that so much. They don't do that so much, but if you ever become a school nurse, there's always some, like, one kid in every grade that's there every day in your office. Like, it hurts so bad. That's a symptom. Headache is a symptom because you can't measure that the person has one. What else? Dizzy is a symptom, but if they fall over, then you could write that down in the chart. Like, the patient fell out of the chair. That would be a sign. So signs versus symptoms.
Do we need to know signs versus like
The concept, and then I usually would ask, like, if a person, if this is what the problem is this a sign?
Well, if the person says I feel, then that's automatically a symptom. But if it's like I see you look like.
Or if they say I feel hot, you need to take their temperature.
Yeah. Okay. So, but then that would be a symptom until
Yeah.
someone measures.
Or if they say I'm
Well,
having really bad anxiety. That's a symptom, blood pressure, and you could measure their heart rate.
so it could be potentially be both, but it's the symptoms until it's measured.
Yeah. Like anxiety is a symptom, but elevated heart rate is a sign.
I know.
Okay, don't forget Friday that you have a video to watch. And we will start with this one definition slide Friday, and then we will go with whatever is the next slide set.
Epidemiology or whatever.
It might be progress of infections too.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Oh no, I'm getting kind of behind. It'll be okay. It'll be okay.